Who in the back is speaking, if they could mute their microphone, I'd appreciate that. So thank you very much. As I was saying, my name is Jack Kuperfman, and we have our panelists. This is the style in which we're going to do it. We're going to have a keynote by Craig Mokhiber, and then after that's going to be for a number of minutes. Then with our panelists, we're going to do this kind of interview style, where I'm going to ask a question, and all of the panelists can participate by bringing their own perspectives. We have all of them here today. So what I'm going to do at the outset is do some. I don't know how long this is going to take, because we are time bound. We have 1 hour to do this, and then subsequent to this, there's going to be another session on youth. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to do, I was able to assemble a number of bios. So, but we're really thrilled that Craig Mokhiber is going to be with us, because he's one of the experts on human rights at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. He has been a strong advocate on behalf of older people and understands quite clearly how the case has been made for the human rights of older people, how that fits into development generally at the global level, and has been a proponent to push forward a convention for the human rights of older people. This is an important thing that has not always been addressed in all of the global forums. He's currently the director of the New York office of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. He has been, you name it, he's been there. In every part of the world. He's been working on the ground as well as at the policy level with regard to the human rights of all people. Now, we're going to do some of this at the outset. We also have Krishna Gautam from Aging Nepal. Krishna has been pushing forward the concerns of older people, and I believe at this point, Aging Nepal is the premier organization in Nepal about advocacy on behalf of older persons. He started out in his career working on economic development issues, and then in 2011, founded Aging Nepal. Aging Nepal has been transformative in Nepal with regard to older people. And one of his emphases is not only on the rights of older people, but also on how to provide important concerns for older people in Nepal. Most recently, he was given the UNESCO Award on Literacy for his efforts with regard to basic literacy for older people in Nepal. And that program has been expanded significantly. So we're thrilled to have Krishna here. And then I'd also like to introduce Nataša Todorović, and I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly, and also Milutin Vračević. Both of them are from work with Red Cross in Serbia. Nataša is a psychologist and a master of public health, and is the president of the Gerontological Society of Serbia, and has been working very closely with the INPEA, International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. She has been very active, not only at the level of Serbia with regard to elder abuse and human rights issues, but also at the global level. It's exciting. Her work is well known, and we're excited to have her. She and her partner have, in 2018, they were awarded the International Rosalie Wolf Award in Elder Abuse Prevention by INPEA. Now, her partner, Milutin Vračević, is a doctor, also Master of Public Health, and has been working equally hard on the issues of elder abuse, both nationally and globally. He also works in INPEA and is a member of the GARAP, the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People. The two of them together are a force to be reckoned with. And Also, I wanted to bring to our attention, representing Africa and the Indian Ocean, is Vijay Naraidoo. If I make mistakes on these names, I apologize. But Vijay is a retired person from Mauritius and has brought all of his background and his passion to the issues of older people in the Indian Ocean, and has been at the forefront of the development of GARAP, the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People. And he has been vocal in ensuring that the country of Mauritius comes on board. So I wanted to say thank you to everyone here, and we're just thrilled. What I'd like to do is, because our time is short, I wanted to, and how can I forget? I apologize. We also have Chloe Zisselman. Chloe is a current senior at Colgate University here in New York State. And she had been a summer intern with Great Panthers this summer and became aware of the critical nature of the concerns of older people, and particularly with the human rights abuses. And she will be addressing some of the issues of why it's so important for younger people to be involved in this initiative to ensure the human rights of older people, which really means the human rights for all. So what I would like to do is I'd like to start with Craig as our keynote speaker and to give us an overview of where we stand and where we need to go. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jack, for that introduction. Thanks for the invitation as well to you and the Grey Panthers and the other colleagues, and congratulations on a terrific panel that you've put together. Look forward to hearing from all of them, and also congratulations on this linking up with youth and taking an intergenerational approach and trying to build intergenerational solidarity around these issues. I think it's absolutely essential. As you pointed out, the human rights of older persons are about the human rights of everybody. And I think building those intergenerational connections is really very important. But I have to say that I think it's time for a really strong call to action on this issue. I mean, as we're talking today, the human rights of millions of older persons are under threat, and increasingly so. You have social and economic and political choices in law and policy that are literally sacrificing the lives of countless older persons in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. And ageist attitudes that have always been with us are being further inflamed in the context of this pandemic. And I have to say that so devastating have been the developments that we've been all, of the last 18 months in particular, that we've all been forced to learn a new word: senicide. We know that older persons and those with underlying conditions are at higher risk of serious illness and death from COVID-19. We know now that older persons have been denied health services, care and support. They've been physically and socially isolated. They've been made victims of ageist attitudes. And we know that despite there being a very diverse group, older persons in general have been painted as vulnerable and branded as burdens to society throughout this pandemic, even though it's older persons who are often the pandemic's caregivers and volunteers and community leaders, upon whom communities are relying through the pandemic. We have reports from care homes and institutions revealing neglect and isolation and lack of adequate care and services, including healthcare and social and legal services. We know that the lockdown measures have resulted in more abuse and neglect of older persons. And care facilities have often been granted immunity from legal liability for COVID-19 related deaths, and older persons forced to waive their right to legal action to defend or remedy their rights. Remember that remedy itself is a human right under international law, and this is a very clear breach. So in this context, much stronger action by all of us to protect the human rights of older persons is now an urgent imperative. And here's what I mean. We start always with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted after the horrors of the Second World War, 1948, because it's the cornerstone of the entire modern international human rights movement. That was supposed to be a break from the horrors of the past and a promise of a more dignified future. But when the Declaration was drafted, with all of its great 30 articles eloquently articulating the building blocks of what was supposed to be a new order of freedom from fear and want, the drafters made an error, because for all of its wisdom and balanced content, it doesn't have a general prohibition on discrimination on the basis of age. That's really remarkable, because the Universal Declaration explicitly prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status, but not a word about age. And that becomes even more important when you realize the Universal Declaration is the main source document for all of the subsequent international human rights covenants and conventions that contain almost nothing explicit about aging and age discrimination. This has meant that very little attention has been given to the human rights of older persons at the international level, even less so, frankly, at the national level. So over all of these decades, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has left this gap that really needs urgently to be filled. Why now? Well, because first, the human life cycle is changing. Human beings are living longer, working longer, creating longer, participating longer. People get married if they're going to get married later. They get their education later. They have children later. They retire later, if at all. Secondly, older persons are a very large and growing constituency of humanity. There are over 740 million older persons in the world today. In a few years, we will pass 1 billion older persons. And by 2045, for the first time in history, there'll be more older persons than children in the world. Third, this is a constituency that's increasingly subjected to a broad range of violations of their civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, perpetrated against them because of their status as older persons. Ageism, age discrimination, exclusion, deprivation, and abuse. This includes institutional neglect and abuse, denial of work, social security, healthcare, and other services, denial of a voice in political processes, targeting by con artists and violent criminals, and interference in their autonomous decisions about their own personal finances, property, housing, and medical care. And finally, there are yawning gaps in the legal, regulatory, policy, and programmatic frameworks at the national and international levels, which have left older persons without adequate protection, redress, and power. At the global level, more than 70 years after the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and with international treaties in place to address a broad range of special groups and subjects of discrimination, there is still no dedicated international convention on the prohibition of age discrimination and the protection of the human rights of older persons. So if older persons represent a large and growing constituency who are entitled to live free and equal in dignity and rights, and yet who suffer particular forms of abuse precisely on the basis of their status as older persons, then we can say that the invisibility of so significant a population in international human rights is itself a statement of our society's deprioritization and neglect of the human rights of older persons. There's a growing body of evidence now that shows that in countries across the globe, the experience of age is increasingly an experience marked by vulnerability, exclusion, discrimination, deprivation, and abuse. We've even seen that in places where indicators of racism and sexism are declining, evidence of ageism is increasing. So in the absence of international standards, in the face of low or often non-existent national standards, shocking cases of institutional neglect and abuse of seniors continue. In other cases, older persons are denied work or social security, essential services, and the full range of economic and social rights. Public policy at the national level lags behind the need, and many in this disempowered group are denied a voice in political processes. Older persons, even where capable of making their own decisions about their finances and property and medical care, are often denied the legal capacity to do so. So some of the areas where the gaps are most evident relate to legal capacity and legal planning, equality before the law, especially the subject to various forms of guardianship. We find similar challenges in standards for long-term and institutional care. We've all heard the heartbreaking stories of older persons denied care or forced to live in unsanitary conditions, subjected to physical abuse, sequestered against their will, and exploited financially and otherwise. The problem here is not the absence of resources to protect older persons, but rather the absence of standards and of enforcement and of political will. While international frameworks to address violence against women and violence against children are largely in place, there is no equivalent for violence against older persons, in spite of the well-documented global reality of the targeting of older persons on the basis of their age and their perceived helplessness. We've all heard the stories, and I don't need to repeat them here, but other gaps are evident as well. Issues at the heart of the aging experience, like mandatory retirement ages, access for older persons to productive resources, political and social participation, standards for end-of-life care, palliative care, geriatric health care, all of these lack human rights standards at the national and international levels. So remedying these broad and long-standing protection gaps requires much more than just piecemeal approaches. That's why a lot of people, including us in the international community, have already mobilized to promote the adoption of an international convention on the human rights of older persons, a new human rights treaty to protect the rights of older persons. And the reasons for this, I can say, are compelling, and there are many. An international convention would provide a comprehensive framework for setting standards, a single global platform for advocacy, a vehicle for constructive international dialogue and cooperation, and an instrument for accountability. It would facilitate global monitoring of human rights, benchmarking, data collection, disaggregation, reporting. Most importantly, the convention would catalyze a paradigm shift away from the failed charitable and traditional approaches to aging of the past, and toward the recognition of older persons, not as victims, but as rights holders, to move away from charity into accountability, from arbitrariness into the rule of law, and ultimately from pity into power. Today, it's simply a fact of life that older persons live longer, work longer, create longer, participate longer, and contribute longer. There's nothing magical that happens at the age of 60 or 65 that explains differential treatment on the basis of age. Only discrimination does. And that discrimination has got to end. Now, it's been 10 years since the UN's Working Group on Aging began its work, charged with looking at the development of a new international instrument, a new treaty on the human rights of older persons. Already at its organizational session in February of 2011, my office highlighted the global situation of older persons and many of these critical challenges and gaps. Now, more than a decade later, whatever modest progress they've made has been entirely overshadowed by the tragic impact of COVID-19 on older persons. What we have witnessed in the past year across the globe in rich countries and poor has to be a wake-up call for all of us. The pandemic has pulled back the curtain on an ugly reality, one of ageism and age discrimination, neglect and abuse, one of preventable sickness and death. There's no more time to waste in moving forward to fill the normative and protection gaps confronting the human rights of older persons. So in recovering and rebuilding from the pandemic, we can't just go back to where we started. If our dismal record of the last 10 years of the working group or the horrors of the past 18 months are any indication of our future progress, we will fail. And the cost to the dignity, rights, and lives of millions of older persons will be recorded with shame in the ledgers of history. Let's say it out loud. The COVID pandemic and many of the policies adopted by states to respond to it have actual genocidal implications. We need to work differently, more quickly, and with more determination to protect the human rights of older persons. This cannot be business as usual. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you. That was a beautiful and compelling statement on why this is so important. I also wanted to point out that I wanted to put some numbers, a number to this. In the United States alone, most of the deaths due to COVID have been of older people, which goes to the concept of genocide. And even more specifically, about 1/3 of the deaths due to COVID in the United States, about 200,000 have been in long-term care facilities. Disgusting, just staggering and disgusting. We're here today to make a difference and to bring that
Et
up.
donc, c'est vraiment horrible et nous sommes là aujourd'hui pour faire la différence.
So I'd also like now to work with our various panelists, and I'm going to give a question to all of the panelists, and then we can go from there. Based on your personal or professional experience, why do you think there hasn't been a substantial conversation about the violation of human rights of older persons during the pandemic? Why has the world stayed silent? Why is there only just a little bit of lip service? And I'd like to, and how do we silence that? How do we remedy that silence? I'd like to start with Nataša and Milutin.
Okay, it's hello. It's not easy to speak after the Craig.
I know it is.
Yeah, I will try. COVID-19, as Craig said, it was the wake-up call, but we failed to answer to that. I think, in my professional opinion, there is a lot of conversation about older person in general, mostly about them being vulnerable to the pandemic. And that main direct their homogeneous nature has been completely overlooked. Similarly, in many countries, their human rights were swept under the rug in the name of their safety. It's yet another reminder that the general image of older person is that they are passive, that we view them from a patronizing position as person who give no contribution to society. And the best example of how we ignored their rights was the informal caregivers, 65 plus, during the pandemic, who providing care to functional dependent older person had a restriction of movement just as anyone else. This is particularly evaluate basic human rights related to access to care. At the same time, healthy and functional independent older person were linked in with those that needed care and had the same kind of restriction, even though they could contribute so much during the pandemic. The remedy is to widely recognize homogeneous nature of older persons, their contribution, skills, knowledge, and their capacity and fundamentally rights of older person with their communities, families, national levels, and global levels. And we need, of course, to motivate younger people to be a part of our advocacy for the new Convention on Human Rights of Older Persons.
Thank you so much. And I do want to make sure that all of the participants have an opportunity to speak. So let's kind of condense, however, whatever we're going to say.
Yeah, like super briefly, actually. You just read what Nataša was saying. I think that the part of this ageistic discourse during pandemic was really this kind of super patronizing way that all these measures was kind of introduced. So all these measures was really kind of to provide safety to other people, although they were actually at the end of the day they were really super victimized by all different kind of lack of access to health, lack of access to care, right. So a bunch of these others, but lots of these measures was really framed as something that actually will contribute to the older people's safety. So this trade-off between safety and freedom, from my opinion, was really one of the hallmarks of COVID and older people. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to also bring this question about your personal and professional experience to Vijay.
Thank you. First of all, let me say that I have been fascinated by the keynote address of Craig. And of course, I stand by what Nataša and colleague have said about the deprivation of older persons during the pandemic. I found two types of invisibility. Older people were invisible because they were asked, imposed upon, not to go out of their homes, not to go out shopping, not to go out meeting friends, not to go out to collect their pension, or even access to health services were not allowed. Even though I know in some countries there were on-call services for older people having issues with their health. Now, the second invisibility is information about what was happening on the ground. Either it was scanty, it was, in the words of the independent expert for the rights of older persons, it was fragmented or non-existent. So this is what I've been observing myself during the pandemic. We forgot, as Nataša said, that older people is not a homogeneous group of persons. There's a diversity, which means that there are different groups of older people who require a personalized or require a different treatment. Now, there was kind of patronization, that is, we are doing it for you, so you have to accept. In the final analysis, I think that why it was a kind of surprise. Although the world has known pandemics before, but in this case, there was a kind of shock or surprise. So I think we have to take to draw lessons from this. So I'll stop here and then I'll resume later.
Krishna?
Thank you, Jack. I think the main points were already presented by my earlier friends. What I see, the umbrella answer to all this invisibility is the literacy, both the ability to read and write and the digital literacy. Because in the present world, with so much of technology that has come in our life, and older people are left behind. So I think very appropriate that this year's International Development, the International Older Person Day has included this equity, digital equity of all ages. I think it will help and it was much needed. So like in my case, in my country, more than 90% of older women in Nepal they cannot read and write. And now we can imagine how you can participate, give information or take information. So lack of information, both to take and give information, was one of the main hurdles that made them invisible, because they are not in social media, they are not in writing, they are not in application putting in, all those things. So basic literacy and digital literacy are the prime thing, the opening door for all the human rights. Given that tools for them, I think they will have information, they will be informed about their rights, and they will also know, they will get the information about their right, and they can also express their right in the present day media, so that they become visible, their voice becomes laudable, you know. So those are the two important things we thought, and that's our experience. And one of the more important realization in our work in Nepal is that I think organizing them at the community level is one of the very basic need that we have started very lately, but is not moving very fast forward. So that would not only help them, this organizing them in the local community groups would not only help them to get the education, get the necessary training, skill and knowledge, but also participate in the society, in their community, and that's how they will become more visible in their community, so more visible in the country and internationally. I think I'll stop it here, and very eager to hear the otherwise friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Chloe, I want you to address the question of why should younger people be involved?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's really such an honor to be here in front of such accomplished individuals. Younger people should be involved because getting older is a privilege that we would all be lucky to have. And that this makes the business of aging a self-serving issue for us all. If we expect to grow old, we should therefore expect to have the rights associated with age. However, this logic seems to be lacking across the international community, which is where the younger generations are needed. It's absolutely imperative that young people should take part in the fight for the human rights of older adults. Intergenerational advocacy is vital to the field's success, as older adults need the youth's vibrancy and hunger for change. Young people want to create a fair world that we all want to live in, and we have the energy to march, yell, and fight for justice, making our voices crucial to the realm of ageism. And yeah, that's my perspective.
And just a little bit about, Chloe, how you became an advocate on behalf of older people and for yourself.
Well, I really became involved this summer as I became an intern with the Great Panthers. And the first conversation I had with Jack, he told me he would blow my mind every single day. And admittedly, I was hesitant to this bold claim, but he's completely turned me. And I'm involved because I think if we all want to have the rights that we deserve to have as we grow older, then every single person needs to be involved. I mean, older adults obviously need to be involved because they are directly impacted by this. They are being discriminated based on their age, but younger people also need to be involved because, as I said before, we have the energy that older adults don't necessarily have to be proactive about this fight. And I think it's absolutely imperative that all generations take action so that everyone has the rights that they deserve. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you, my friend. So, that was like the first go around. Now, our next question that we're going to be is about COVID and safety nets. The question is there a right to social protection for older adults generally? And does this right, is it just merely some words or is it really in practice? And how has COVID exposed the hardships older persons face due to the lack of social protections? Is there a way forward? What concrete actions have been taken to address these social protection issues, particularly in light of COVID? And for this, I'd like to start here. I'd like to start with Krishna.
Thank you, Jack. Actually, social protection, it's must for me, as I experienced in my country, and I think the same situation in many developing countries, is that it is a very big word, repeated many times with very little groundwork for the older people. For many countries are getting out by giving some old age allowance and saying that okay, that is your social protection. No, but that's not sufficient. And I think that area is it to be very worked out, the elements of it, so that it really covers and makes sure that older people are really covered with to live a dignified life and being productive in the society by using their knowledge and experience, which they are so rich at. So I'm sorry, I don't have much to say about social protection and network. I have not seen much going on except the word is repeated many times. Thank you, sir.
Which is exactly the point, that there isn't that much going on. And Craig, could you address this issue about social protection, older people, particularly in COVID and what it brings out?
Well, absolutely. Social protection is an internationally guaranteed human right to all people. The International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights has been ratified. The vast majority of countries in the world, over 160 countries, have ratified. Others have obligations under other instruments. So it's not like this is something which is supposed to be left to charity, as has been suggested. The problem is that the experience of aging includes a denial of social protection across continents and across countries. It's one of the principal challenges of living a life of dignity into later years. And it's one of the reasons why a specific convention that includes provisions on social protection needs to be promulgated and adopted as soon as possible. So you have that laser focus on the situation of older persons. We've absolutely seen during the COVID pandemic the implications of the lack of protection in place in programs globally of social protection, and how that vulnerability and that exclusion has been exacerbated by the isolation of older persons during the pandemic, by the weakness of the provisions in institutions, but also in family settings. So it's one of the points that has been underscored by the last 18 months that needs to be picked up in this effort to adopt a new international convention on the human rights of older persons.
Thank you. And Nataša and Milutin, can you make a brief comment on this?
Maybe just to be an example from Serbia, not comment. As an example, during the COVID crisis, pensioners in Serbia automatically get financial aid from the state, two per year. But other persons over 65, the only way to access this aid was to go through the application process that involved using smartphone and internet. That shows certain blindness of the part of the system, because those who need help the most actually have to work hardest to get this financial aid. In the future, it is necessary to work on making social welfare assistance easier to access to those who need it most.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Milutin.
No, like super brief. I'll say, like, I think one of the issues regarding like safety and like financial safety of older people during COVID was that their other healthcare cost was really kind of skyrocketing. And although you're receiving pension and etc., your access to your regular like checkups and medical exams was, like in our case, was done actually mostly through private hospitals, and then you need to pay out of your pockets. So although you've been subsidized a bit, your other cost was really way bigger, and no one actually can address that as an issue.
Universal health care, particularly with regard to older persons.
No, in our case, you have kind of universal healthcare, but anyways, because lots of capacity was really devoted to COVID, you didn't have any other option. So you either like wait for a zillion years to your turn, or go to the private hospital. So that was an issue. So in order to get like immediate healthcare, you need to pay. That was the problem.
Now, Vijay, would you be able to contribute on the issue of social protection, COVID,
absolutely.
older people?
Absolutely. You know, I understand that social protection engenders social justice and aims at poverty reduction. I'll talk from what happens here in Mauritius. Since 1951, even at the time Mauritius was a colony of Great Britain, a government introduced a universal old age pension from the age of 60. And this has been maintained up to today, improved incrementally over the years. Now we have got universal health services, free health services for everybody, including all older people, from minor to major interventions. Then we have free public transport for older people since some years now, by public transport. And then you have social affordable housing, that is tailor-made capacity for the people to pay for the social housing, and electricity charges are, let's say, waived for people under a certain ceiling of income. And then in the period of crisis during the pandemic, lockdown and pandemic, NGOs, government, the Ministry of Social Security, NGOs, and private companies made door-to-door food distribution, doorstep food distribution for older people. And then there was a mobile ambulance, of course, ambulance from the hospital on call. And there was home distribution of old age pension to people who couldn't, walk because they were not allowed to walk to the bank. But the officers, the public officers, accompanied by police officers, they went from door to door to distribute their pension to the older persons. Now, the idea, as somebody has said, Craig has said it, I think, the idea is that the people are receiving these services of right, in their own rights. They are not recipients, they are not beneficiaries, but they are having it on their own right. So This is the umbrella, the protection umbrella that is ensured by government year after year in this budget. So there is no indication that these services would be, even in times of, let's say, a crisis or whatever, this will be maintained. Now, I have to tell you, we have in the legislation the Protection of Elderly Act since 2005, and within that that legislation, the interests of older people are safeguarded. Like Elderly Watch in the country, Elderly Watch people participate in committees. You have got social centers, associations of older persons, and then you have a Senior Citizens Council, right, where older persons and other stakeholders meet regularly to discuss in the interest of older persons. So for me, this is my experience of older person of social protection.
You know, that's a good overview of many of the programs available for older people in Mauritius. And that's just right. As an overview, the question is often, how do we make sure that these things are safeguarded throughout the world, as well as in each individual national and local circumstance? And as we speak, I'm also going to ask people to consider what are potential solutions to some of these problems on a global level. The convention is one. How do we mobilize people to support these important concerns on the rights of older people, social protection, development with regard to older people, and including younger people? We don't have too much time, but I do want to, Vijay, did you want to say something?
I'll give you examples. How do we mobilize people in the country? Can you see this this newspaper? Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So we have our NGO. We have, sorry.
It's a good photo.
Yeah. No, I was showing you the article. So we have a weekly 2-page dedicated pages in one of the best-selling newspapers in Mauritius. So week after week, we write on human rights and we advocate for convention for the rights of older persons. We advocate for the ministry, for the government of Mauritius to sign and ratify the AU protocol for the rights of older persons. So we intervene in the media, on radio. In the context of the International Day of Older Persons, we shall be going, we have already secured, programs on radio, island-wide, newspapers, conferences, multi-stakeholders meeting. So and we invite younger people too. So this is one way of mobilizing the people, because in the process, what are we doing? We are engaging younger people in what we call the intergenerational relationships between older people and younger people. We can't do one thing without the other group. So it's everybody on board.
Thank you. Actually, that's very helpful and encouraging, something that we can all take to heart. I'd like to turn to another question that I would like everybody to address on long-term care and human rights, particularly with regard to older people in light of the pandemic and what that brought out. What are some of the human rights issues regarding long-term care in various situations, whether institutional, residential, family, or individual? As I was reflecting before, COVID has devastated older populations. What are we going to do with that? How does that fit into the human rights for older people? What does the world need to do, and why is the world ignoring it? On this one, I'm going to start with, again, with Craig.
That's one of those things that really has to be spelled out in the national and international legislation, because the issue of quality, for example, of care has really come to the forefront in recent months with COVID. The issue of access to quality care, including affordability, where family care is not adequate, is a huge issue that has to be reckoned with. The issue of the autonomy of a person who is under care. Their autonomy socially and politically and economically and otherwise to make their own decisions, including with regard to their healthcare and so on. A huge issue for protection there. Access to redress when you are under care and your rights have been breached in some way so that you have legal redress, a huge care there. And then ultimately just a test of dignity, that we all have a right to a dignified life, including if we are in long-term care, is something that needs, I think, to be addressed. Just a few ideas that come to mind immediately, Jack.
That's fabulous. I wanted to make sure that we include the voice of younger people because this concept of intergenerational advocacy is so important. Specifically, with regard to long-term care and advocacy, I wanted to talk to Chloe. How do we involve younger people as family members, community members, and advocates for long-term care? How do we raise awareness about the issues of long-term care amongst younger people?
Well, I just want to start out by saying that I completely agree with Craig that international conventions are imperative to this process because states and nations currently have no mechanism for compliance with human rights of older adults since there's no structure requiring them to do so. As for younger people, I think the most effective way to raise awareness around the world about the issues of long-term care is through social media engagement. I could speak for myself, I could speak for my peers. I spend way too much time on social media and it's become a huge news source for me and my peers as well. And social media should be this platform to spread the awareness of ageism. With social media being the platform for information dissemination, for news, just for even individual testimonials, I think it would be a huge way for young people to get involved and be witnesses to these injustices that are not necessarily at the forefront of their minds. And that way intergenerational activism could be exponentially more effective as a result.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd also like on this issue of long-term care, however it's delivered in Nepal, I would be very interested to hear from Krishna. What are the human rights issues in long-term care, particularly during the pandemic with regard to older people?
Thank you, sir. When it comes to the right of health, for the older people, we always talk about accessibility. Again, that their basic literacy and digital literacy hinders their access to information. That is one block, that they don't get proper health information at the right time. And this has been the case in many older people because they didn't know where the vaccines are available, where to go, and all that thing. So, but okay, given that's a minor aspect, another main serious issue is the availability of human resource in the country. For example, in my country of 30 million, we have 5 geriatrician, health worker, and they are not simply enough health facilities available for be it short-term health care or the long-term here. They don't have availability of specialized health care from gerontologist or geriatrician. So I think any country must emphasize to produce enough qualified human resource in geriatrics and gerontology so that those people can be mobilized, knowledgeable services are made available, and then we can go into affordability and accessibility and such things. So in Nepal, we have been advocating and campaigning for more geriatricians and more gerontologists in the country, and we are also doing our own effort as much as we can by training nurses and geriatric care. So many countries, I'm afraid, do not have enough qualified human resource to provide health services for the older people. So that means geriatrics and gerontologists. We see that the main hurdle, and we are fighting for it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And now I'd like to turn this to Nataša and Milutin in terms of long-term care, human rights, COVID, older people.
We just finished one research about mental health informal caregivers, and we realized that during the COVID, 30% of informal or family caregivers have some symptoms of depression. Why I said that? Because currently all the states are almost blind when it comes to informal family caregivers. So they need to turn around and see that they are the ones who make dignity and respect of human rights of older persons possible. If state fail to see this, their contribution to increase risk of elder abuse, if state don't give them education, respite services, or some kind of help, we will fail when we speak about informal caregivers.
Yeah, super briefly, I think the COVID was really kind of exposed the South Valley of how the long-term care systems are designed all over the world. And I think one of the consequences of COVID that we should really kind of rethink the way how we provide both care and health services. And in a way, what was really kind of dramatic is how the COVID was really kind of hijacked the health services, and then health services really not able to provide other services actually, or access to non-COVID services. So in theory, you have like two pillars of mortality of other people. One will be from COVID, but the other will be from not treated or undertreated chronic conditions. So that was really kind of dramatic, I think. Like access to non-COVID essential health services was really, I mean, scarce.
Thank you. Thank you. This is one of the things that I'm getting from all of these comments is I want everybody who's on the call, not just the people who already know, to think about how often the concerns of older people and intergenerational solidarity is never addressed, not even thought about. That's part of what we're talking about today. And one of the things that Craig has so effectively highlighted. How do we do that? How do we make that the visibility of older people and their concerns part of the general conversation? What I'd like, since we don't have too much time, I want to ask each of the panelists on like, what do they want people on this call to know about? And what I'd like to do is I want to start with Chloe.
I think everyone on this call and ultimately everyone in the world to know how pressing this issue is. I think something really admirable about people working in the field of aging is that they often put the needs of others, more issues that seem more important at the time, racism, LGBTQ rights, women's rights. People in this field often prioritize those goals because they feel those are more important, but then it takes the attention away from the problems of ageism, which are arguably just as important. So I think the people in this field work so hard from what I've seen so far. I'm obviously not a professional, and I think it's our time to have our issues highlighted by everyone in the world as well. And, you know, COVID has exponentially made this more clear. And I saw a statistic that said that as of April 2021, 95% of the deaths from COVID were from people over 50, which is horrific. And it makes me sick to my stomach. And I would really love if everyone on this call and everyone everywhere would, you know, pay attention to a statistic like that and realize how pressing this problem is.
Thank you, Chloe. Vijay? What do you want everybody to know?
Yeah, before I tell you what I want people to know, I'm very much interested, excuse me to go back, in the type of care that people receive in residential homes or in hospitals or in their homes. According to the WHO report, as at 15th June 21, 1 in 6 people over 60 years have known or experienced some forms of abuse, right? And the rates of abuse are higher in institutions such as nursing homes and long-term facilities. What I want people to know is this shouldn't be only a kind of wage earning system, it is a vocation. Now, what I want people to know, to answer your question, Jack, I want people to know that they have the capacity to mobilize the population, their fellow citizens, mobilize them, and push our respective governments to take a firm stand at the United Nations open-ended working group on aging to say we want a convention and we want the write-up to start now. This is the message that I want to convey through this platform, that we can mobilize people in our respective countries. We have come a long way since 10 years now. We are near to reaching that point of finding that convention. I think the convention will bring a lot of things. When we domesticate it in our own constitution, we shall find a lot of, let's say, the way ahead for a better protection of all the persons in our respective countries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Craig?
Yeah, Jack, I agree with everything that's been said. I think the thing that I'd most like to see is really a mobilization of action on these issues. You know, we've looked at why we've seen so little movement in 10 years on the adoption of a convention on the human rights of older persons, and it's clear that the main issue is that the ambassadors in New York are not feeling any heat from at home. The governments at home are not pressuring the ambassadors for action on this because the governments at home are not being adequately pressured. And we need governments in capitals all around the world to feel the heat from their own people of a demand for change and for action and for correcting the faults at the national level and for the adoption of an international convention on the human rights of older people. Because until that mobilization happens, until that heat is felt by governments, we're not going to see the action that we need. So I think COVID-19, with all of its horrors, has also provided a moment in history where public opinion can be brought to our side and public mobilizations can be catalyzed to make sure governments do feel that heat.
On that comment, we're going to have to end our session. It was really quite heartfelt and everybody made outstanding contributions. I hope that we'll be able to use this again, as Craig just said, as a catalyst for further action. So the next session will be starting almost in a moment. And I want to say thank you to all of our panelists and for their automatic, heartfelt and intelligent and useful contributions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.